Minutes.
Will recite poetry about their country. They'll write songs about their country. They'll tell stories about their country. They'll do anything but live in it.
Because those green hills are not Highland hills, or the island hills. They're not my land's hills, and fair as these green foreign hills may be, they are not the hills of home.
Ladies and gentlemen, cheers and fellow caterers, welcome to Dunedin. Tonight, we take part in the address to the haggis. It is used all over the world to remind people of Scots descent of their greatly superior culture. Now, this is very relevant to Dunedin because, as you know, Dunedin is a Scottish city, the Edinburgh of the South Pacific. Where you may not realise is that being the fourth largest city in the world in area, it is actually the largest Scottish city in the world. In fact, it is the only truly Scottish city in the whole world. The only city to have been conceived, designed, built and settled by and for Scots people. All those places north of the English border are but accidents of history.
It truly is a Scottish city, and all you have to do is wake up in the morning here, and you'll hear the pipes somewhere, and you walk down the street, and it feels Scottish. Look at the architecture.
My great-grandparents lived near Edinburgh. They were very humble people. They wanted a different life. It came out in 1848 in the third ship, the Blundell. They came to Dunedin as part of the scheme of the lay association of the Free Church of Scotland, whereby immigrants who wanted a different life, a life away from the poverty and economic distress of Scotland at that time, and to be able to pursue their own religious ideals. But the Free Church arose from a deep spiritual ferment in the church, and in 1843 and formed another church, the Free Church of Scotland.
A large number of the clergy walked out of the Moderator General's Assembly in Edinburgh. They objected to the system of patronage that was rife within the church at the time. And when the suggestion was made to found a Scottish settlement, some grasped at the idea eagerly to establish a settlement here based on the ideals and principles of the Free Kirk of Scotland. The spiritual leader was the Reverend Thomas Burns, who was himself a nephew of the poet Robert Burns.
At the end of the year, you kill your animal, you hang it up to dry, and you're left with all these lovely juicy bits, like the lungs, the liver, the heart, the chitterlings, the lights, the great intestine. You're not going to waste such tasty morsels, are you? No, no, no. You mince them up, you mix them together with oatmeal and spices, you cook them in the animal's stomach to get the extra juices, and then you sell it to the tourists. It's a marvellous idea.
Years ago, they used to put in stuff that they couldn't get rid of in the shops and things like that, but now we've just got to stick with the real, genuine haggis meat. The onions help to give it the flavour. Now the seasonings, special ingredients, now the flour and the oatmeal. Would you like to try some?
Haggis comes from an old English word, haggis, which means haggis. In turn, it comes from an older French word, haggis, which means haggis. Now, the haggis is attended by the gilly cow, an important person, the gilly cow. It's their job to advise the chief on affairs of state and matters of etiquette. And tonight, our gilly cow is Matt.
For me, it's about expressing the Scottish identity correctly. I mean, I obviously, when I'm partaking in such things, I try to do it as well as I can and as authentically as I can. But it's part of sharing the culture, and that's the culture that I come from, even though I wasn't directly involved in it as much in Scotland as I am here in New Zealand. When I was born, my parents lived in sort of rooms, like in a boarding house in Govan, you know. Then we moved out to Pollock. These are all like suburbs throughout Glasgow and stuff. Each time we moved, it was like for better housing conditions, and my father would move his employment for, you know, to gain better financial returns and stuff. And really, we turned into kind of gypsies. We just kept moving around all the time. Scotland wasn't going through a particularly good time just prior to when we left, and things, you know, eventually got worse. The place where I was employed 6 months after we left closed down, and I don't know what happened to the people who were working there. They just were dispersed, you know, and eventually it kind of brought us out to New Zealand as well. But it is a difficult thing to do, to have the courage to actually uproot everything and move, particularly to the other side of the world. So, I think the pride that the Dunedin people have in their ancestors and their forebears is justified. I mean, these were extremely brave people.
When they first came, of course, the conditions were primitive, and sometimes the weather was pretty grim, but they were used to that in Scotland anyway. But they did find a better life. They were able to do their own things and make a life for themselves. And I think the Lowland Scots influence has affected the settlement of Otago more than any romantic Highland ideas or romantic Highland carryings-on. We were Lowland Scots, more interested in getting on, more conservative than perhaps their Highland brethren. I think strength would be the word that I would use very much in looking around and seeing the faces, and they look solid, they look strong. I know the picture that is in there of my great-grandparents, which John and Janet Somerville, they were characters, and they were always interested in education. And my great-grandmother, for example, took the first Sunday school in Otago in her own house.
Otago Boys High School was founded in 1863, which was only 15 years after the settlers arrived here. In 1869, they had founded a first university in New Zealand, here, with the University of Otago.
It's part also of the educational thing in the Scottish tradition, that the people wanted education not merely for boys, but for girls. You know, the establishment of the first girls' high school in the British Empire here in Dunedin was a characteristic of that kind of trend, that women had to have their chance.
His knife, see rustic labour dicht, and cut ye up wi' ready slecht, trenching your gushing entrails brecht like ony ditch. Then, oh, what a glorious sight.
I've been much more able to do things that I want to do, much more freedom here to do the things I want to do. Things I could never have done in Scotland. I've go to university, which would have been unheard of for me to do that. I own a little piece of land. I could never have owned land in Scotland. I really had been destined to work alongside my father in the brickworks. That was my first job when I left school. I left school, went into the brickworks. University was for other people, and ownership of land was sort of out of the question. For somebody in my position anyway, we lived in a council house, and I wasn't earning all that much in the way of money. And never really, those sort of options weren't really there. You just didn't consider them. I've got great memories of Scotland, but I've got no desire whatsoever to ever return there.